This is a photo of Singapore 50 years ago, and this is Singapore now. This is a picture of Dubai 30 years ago, and this is Dubai today. These are the changes of decades, but imagine the changes over centuries. No need to imagine, I'll tell you. The first cities date back to over 7,000 years ago. The first ones were likely located between two rivers in Mesopotamia, a region in Western Asia, along the Nile in ancient Egypt, along the Indus River Valley on the Indian subcontinent, and along the Yellow River in China. The location of cities wasn't random. The settlements were formed on fertile land close to the source of water. Having a river was also important for traveling and transportation, but being so close to the water was also a threat. So, cities had walls around to define the borders and to protect them from possible attacks. In the cities of ancient Egypt, within the city walls, there was the main road, plus several little roads and streets connected to it. The houses were made of mud brick and looked like this. They could be easily destroyed by water in case of flood, but then a new one would be built right on top of the previous one. The cities weren't too big. Most of them only had a population of only around 5,000 people. But there was one really big city, Rome. In 133 BCE, it had 1 million inhabitants. There was no other city with such a big population until 1810, when London reached 1 million. Over the centuries, the Roman Empire was growing, covering the territories of modern Italy, France, Spain, northern parts of Africa, and other territories around the Mediterranean Sea. The Romans wanted to transfer messages and notices between different provinces, and in 20 BCE, Emperor Augustus established a postal system that was a huge success. Of course, it wasn't as fast as today. There was a mounted messenger who was traveling around at a speed of around 50 miles per day. The Roman Empire fell in the 5th century CE, and that's when the medieval period starts. The cities were built somewhere close to the water and typically had circular routes. There were large structures somewhere close to the defensive walls and open space around them. From there were narrow streets that looked like tunnels. The houses were typically located in the southeastern part of the city. Most houses were made of wood and were facing each other in opposite directions to give the inhabitants some space. The cities were smaller and dirtier than modern ones because there was no sewage or draining systems, which also meant no privilege of everyday baths like we have today. With time, cities stopped building walls because they were growing bigger, but also the walls weren't protective enough anymore. During the Industrial Revolution, people were drawn to cities to work, and cities were growing bigger and getting urbanized. They were overcrowded, and due to poor hygiene, people didn't really feel good in those places. But sometime later, those everyday problems started to get solved. First, there was the rise of public transportations. In the 19th century, it was horse buses, of course. Street lighting appeared too, and then sewage and draining systems were built. In 1886, Carl Benz applied for a patent for the first vehicle that is now considered to be the first automobile. Ever since, cars started to appear, and they looked like this. In the 20th century, cities started to grow higher to accommodate the growing population and grow wider to accommodate public transportation, and that's how we got where we are. Now, we can buy anything by going to the store or even staying at home, just clicking online. But we had a long way there. Early shops had no glass windows because glass was a luxury back then. Shops were specialized and had a very limited variety of goods, and the shopkeepers usually lived above them. Markets and fairs were very popular. People who wanted to buy or sell something would travel long distances to get to a fair. The first supermarket in the USA was built in 1930, and the first shopping malls only appeared in the 1950s. A lot of things we still use now were invented a long time ago. Let's play a little game. I'll show you stuff from the past, and you have to guess what that is. Let's start with one of the oldest inventions, which appeared around 3000 BC in Mesopotamia. What do you think it is? It's a kettle. There were also mass production of these. Do you want to make another guess? These are ceramics, bowls and jars that were affordable even to the middle class. And look at this rock. Do you have any idea what it is? It's a map. Over the centuries, maps evolved from carvings on rocks to detailed maps on paper to the digital maps we have now. Okay, another rock from ancient Rome for you. Do you want to make a guess? It's a newspaper. Romans were inscribing news on stones or metal plates and were placing them in public places. Even after the invention of a script, people were writing on scrolls. They would be super long, which was making it inconvenient to read. The Romans were the people to invent a bound book as we know it now. What about this? It's quite modern actually. It's a toothbrush and it was invented in 1780. A guy carved a handle from a cow bone and attached pig bristles to it. One of the first hairbrushes looked like this. Did you know that they were invented by the Vikings? The Vikings were the best groomed people in the Middle Ages actually. They cared a lot about appearance, and makeup's roots go back to ancient Egypt. Of course, they didn't have fancy 90-shade eyeshadow palettes back then. Their makeup was mostly limited to black and green. The black coal was made by mixing soot with galena, and the eyeshadows were green because they were mixing galena with malachite. Back then, both men and women were wearing makeup, believing that their eye makeup was protecting them from the evil eye and could cure eye diseases. There have been toys over the centuries. Some are creepy, some are more or less okay, but we've made it a long way to modern and colorful toys. And these are roller skates. Would you risk it? Gym equipment looked like this. This thing right here is a vacuum cleaner. What about this thing? No way you'll guess. It's a toaster. And this one here is one of the first washing machines. In 2022, some people just buy clothes for the season and toss them into the trash afterwards. Too bad. In medieval times, clothes were too expensive and were meant to be worn the longest possible. So, people were taking care of it, and washing clothes often wasn't part of the plan. The clothes were washed only when needed. Only the linen that was directly touching the body was being washed regularly, partly because linen only gets nicer and softer with every wash. So let's take a look at fashion in the 20th century. Here are the swimsuits. 100 years ago, bathing caps were part of a women's swimsuit to protect her hairstyle. These sailor-style bathing suits were extremely popular in the early 1900s. Later on, the swimsuits got shorter, but still far from what we have now. There were even swimsuit regulations to make sure that women's swimsuits aren't too revealing. In the 20s and 30s, men were wearing these striped ones. In the 1940s, women started to wear one-piece swimsuits that looked like dresses. Revealing swimsuits as we know them now only came around in the 1970s. But probably the most dramatic development of the 20th century is technology. The first computer ever was invented in 1837, but it wasn't built until 1910 by the son of the inventor. The computer looked like this. This one here is the first programming computer that was created in 1936. Here are photos of other computers over the years. This is what we had just 20 years ago. Maybe you still remember those huge screens. And this is what we have now. Do you want to guess what this is? This is a computer mouse. The first TVs appeared in 1927, and this is what they looked like. And if you're young and don't remember it, here are the first cell phones. They were way smaller and way thicker, and tapping the screen wouldn't do anything.
That's it for today. So hey, if you pacified your curiosity, then give the video a like and share it with your friends. Or if you want more, just click on these videos and stay on the bright side.